Grampian Nation, I wanted to say thank you. You have made Building Men a category bestseller on Amazon. We're doing phenomenal on Barnes & Noble. If you have not yet read Building Men, I'd encourage you, go online, find a copy wherever you get books, and give us a great review. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to the next time we get to chat on the Grampian. Hey, Grampian Nation, our top ever podcast was Ryan Ruffaner, and he is an industrial organizational psychology practitioner. And I hope I got that out right, man, because that's a mouthful. Anyway, he's coming to you again. This is podcast number 3 with Ryan. Stand by.
In 2013, I coined the name Grampian, and I gave it to your host, Jim Tracy.
Hey, Ryan, welcome back to the Grampian, man. We're so thrilled to have you back. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, very well. And just to refresh everybody, you are an industrial, organizational psychology practitioner. What do you do?
Oh man, the Cliff Note version is I use peer-reviewed data and research to make the workplace function better for everybody. And that this goes into everything from organizational development, selection and assessment for hiring, promotions, everything, including change management. And unfortunately, a lot of people in my field also do DEI.
Yeah.
However, one of the reasons why I've been on your podcast is because my research on DEI shows that it doesn't work and it makes things worse.
Yeah.
So that is in a nutshell what I do and what IO psychologists do.
Awesome. And so for our listeners, give us the thumbnail version. What is DEI?
So DEI officially stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, it doesn't actually mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. It means, in this case, discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, because DEI has a very specific way of looking at the world, which, again, Cliff Notes version here, is it's basically people are primarily to be understood and related to based on identity groups, not individuality. And those identity groups signal whether they belong into an oppressor or oppressed dynamic. So it's a very binary system. If you belong to a majority group, you're an oppressor. If you belong to a minority group, you're oppressed.
Okay.
The more groups you belong to in the majority category, the more oppressive you are. And the more you belong to the minority group categories, the more oppressed you are.
Okay, so what happens if I want to? It's like, so I am now 66. That makes me a senior citizen. So did I just move from one group to the other? Because old people are a minority, man. I'm a protected class now. I'm on Medicare.
So officially, that would make sense. But there's a lot of things about DEI that don't make sense. One of those things is age. A lot of times they don't really care that much about age. Even in the research, they're mostly focused on race. Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. Sorry. It's mostly about race and gender, and then a little bit about sexuality. So if you're straight, white, male, sorry, you're out of luck, man. Doesn't matter how old you are.
Okay, well, I'm trying to tan, but I guess I fit in your category. But anyway, so but as I look at it, the since our last, I mean, we talked last a year ago, and it was ramping up into maybe ridiculous levels, and socially. I think a lot of people looked at that and said, well, it sounds good, but it doesn't look fair. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. And, there's been a number of things that have happened since I believe we last talked that has changed the landscape a bit, including so the 3 big things that have changed it to go against DEI have been, first, the Supreme Court decision to ban, quote unquote, race conscious admissions in higher education, which is basically just racist admissions that discriminated against Asians and white people in favor of blacks and Hispanics. And one of the ways they did this was by requiring Asians and white people to get much higher scores to be admitted to universities, particularly Ivy League universities, compared to black and Hispanic people.
Yeah.
The second thing that happened was when Trump got into office, he passed a bill banning DEI in the federal government, for federal contractors, and for public universities, which is something that a lot of states have been doing up to that point, trying to do. And the third thing actually happened very recently. This is great news. The Supreme Court ruled that white people are now a protected class in terms of civil rights. You can't discriminate against them. Now, if that sounds weird because you're like, hold on, weren't we already a protected class? It said that you shouldn't discriminate on the basis of race. You're right, but now it's, I hate to say more official than it was before, but that's,
Yeah.
I think, the right way to say it. Is they're like,
Yeah.
no, y'all got to stop.
This is such a sensitive topic.
Yes.
People are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, Ryan Ruffaner said white people. And there's I want to be clear. Number one, I want the audience to know, like, I and you are fully engaged against discrimination
Yes.
and discriminating behavior. And if you like pick out a feature or if you pick out something about somebody that's not merit based, that's wrong. I mean, isn't it? I mean, and the best description I heard of that is like, I'm 5'9" and I want to play in the NBA, and I'm 66, so I get like 2 pass points, and I would be underrepresented in the NBA from a racial profiling level. So why won't you let me into the NBA? Well, listen, you chubby old man, you can't run fast enough, and you can't score enough points, and you can't play defense. So I guess I don't belong in the NBA.
Yeah.
It's kind of that simple, ain't it?
Yeah, especially when it comes to certain jobs that have more, I don't want to say responsibility, but basically responsibility, like firefighters. For example, there's going to be men disproportionately represented in firefighting because it requires a lot more strength to be able to carry all that gear. And then possibly if somebody is unconscious in a burning building, if you can't lift them out of there, they're dead and they die in probably one of the worst ways to die. They're burning
kind of
alive.
Big consequences.
Yeah, big consequences. Okay, but here's the thing. That doesn't just lead to a disproportionate male representation. It also means that guys like me who have chronic injuries and chronic pain can't do it. But I'm okay with that. I don't view that as discrimination against me because of a disability. I view that as I can't do the job. The stakes are high, and I should be humble enough and realistic enough to accept those limitations so that the firefighters who can do the job, even if they're just really strong women, can do their job and rescue people and save people.
Okay. So you mentioned the courts on a political level. How has the landscape changed in the last year?
So in the last year, there's been a couple of things that happened. One is that we see a lot more pressure coming from the official political sphere, so legislation-based changes. So the Supreme Court eliminating those race-based, admissions. We see, with the banning of DEI within the federal government, the Supreme Court decisions. We see all of that. However, we also have to acknowledge that DEI, again, this is my opinion, this is from my research, has been very, very clever, very sneaky with some of the ways that they avoid responsibility and they continue their practices. And we still continue to see that because, Jim, one of the things that I see is people on the, it's not that simple, but people on the right side of the political spectrum are people who are anti-DEI. They will look at this, all these victories, and say, oh my God, we've won. And I see people on the other side saying, oh my God, we've lost, it's all over. And frankly, it's not that simple. There's a lot of ways that DEI is adapting, hiding, and surviving, even its toxic manifestations.
Yeah. So is there a danger? I mean, and I'm going to play a bit of the skeptic a minute. So
sure.
Is there a danger that the pendulum from from the new administration could swing too far?
Yes, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like, if you think of this as like a big character habit change for a country instead of on the basis of an individual, it's entirely possible it could go swing the other way. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the key concerns for getting rid of DEI. There's a couple big challenges with getting rid of it. One of the big problems is that we don't want to replace it with something equally bad, but in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
What I've said is I don't want to replace a big, bloated, unnecessary bureaucratic body that is DEI with a different kind of bureaucratic body that has different kinds of sensitivity trainings, but with different emotional persuasions. I don't want to change the nature of it, but ultimately have it be the same type of beast.
Yeah. So, a lot of people would say that DEI is not dead.
Mhm.
It is kind of, I mean, it's like this big bear.
Yeah.
It went in the cave for the winter and it's perhaps hibernating.
Mhm.
Is do you see evidence of that in anywhere or
Yes. Yeah. So I can give you examples of this. So, for example,
awesome?
when I look at DEI and the reports of DEI, quote unquote, going away, there's a couple of things that I noticed. Okay, I think we've got to be very careful, very vigilant of the language that they're using. So, for example, I've seen some companies or media announce that companies are, quote unquote, rolling back their DEI initiatives.
Hmm.
Rolling back does not mean getting rid of. Let's be clear. They may, for example, fire some of their DEI staff, but not all their staff. They may get rid of some DEI initiatives, but not all their DEI initiatives. So, for example, they may get rid of um, the asking DEI based questions in hiring, but they haven't gotten rid of their so called employee resource groups, which are groups that sound like they ought to benefit everybody, but they actually segregate people based on race, gender, sexuality, and so forth, and then give those people unfair, uneven opportunities for training and leadership development and things like that. So reducing does not mean eliminating. Rolling back does not necessarily mean getting rid of completely.
Hmm.
That's number one. There's another one where I've seen companies say we have stopped reporting it to putting it in our annual shareholder reports. But just because you've stopped reporting it doesn't mean that it's still happening, right? If I go to the gym and I say, I'm no longer recording or reporting that I'm going to the gym. I'm no longer signing in with the little key fob thing. Doesn't mean I'm not still going. It just means I'm not recording it. I'm not reporting it to shareholders. And in
Yeah.
this case, part of that is because some of these companies in the last year or so have acknowledged that DEI is now, based on the pushback, a risk factor. But it doesn't mean they discontinued it. I've also seen where they have discontinued explicit DEI goals, but they're still practicing it. So going back to that gym metaphor, I may have gone from saying, I am going to explicitly try to deadlift 300 pounds. That's my goal. Just because I don't have that goal anymore doesn't mean I'm not still going there and deadlifting as much as I can, trying to get closer to that goal. It just means I am not saying it to anybody else anymore.
Yeah.
When it comes to DEI, what this looks like is companies used to say things like, we want to achieve 50% minority or female representation on our
Hmm.
board by 2026, which in order to do that, you would have to use race and gender as a factor in order to achieve that goal.
Hmm.
And they'll simply say, well, we're discontinuing that explicit goal. But then if you go on their company website or you look at some of the positions that they're hiring for on LinkedIn, they still have those criteria.
Yeah.
There's two more. One of them is renaming and rebranding. This is a big one. This is by far the most common one that I've seen, especially in universities. They will get rid of their DEI office in compliance with state or federal law, but then they will create a new office called the Division of Access and Opportunity, or Division of Inclusion and Diversity, or Inclusion and Equity, or the Institutional Equity Office. And these, Jim, these are not just in places like California or Seattle. These are in places like Kentucky and Alabama and Texas, places that you would expect would have gotten rid of them and completely.
Wow. So,
Yeah,
in
sorry,
many
go on.
ways, it sounds like quiet resistance,
Yes,
but it looks like, I may say, it looks like quiet resistance, but it's real resistance.
yes,
It's
yeah.
it's active,
Mhm.
tactile resistance. How do you get the message out, and what's the message we should be sending?
The message is DEI is not dead. It's rebranding. It's hiding. I would even say it's recouping. It's recovering. What I think, and this is just my opinion. All right, the other stuff I was just talking about, that's research. This is my opinion. I think that after Donald Trump, whatever you think of him, gets out of office, I think these things, these departments and initiatives that were kind of going underground, I think they're going to try to resurface once they
Mm-hmm.
have less explicit, intentional pushback from people.
Yeah.
Uh, I also see that a lot of the things, no matter what you look at, a lot of things that people don't like that's happening in the political sphere right now, people are constantly saying, especially in the DEI sphere, they're saying, this is why we need DEI, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to make the case that basically without us is absolute chaos, bigotry, discrimination, and so on and so forth. And of course, some of these ways that they're hiding isn't really that uh, sneaky. Like, for example, SHRM, SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management,
Mm-hmm.
they changed their diversity conference to inclusion conference. And you can look at it online. It's the same kind of workshops, it's the same kind of trainings. It's really not that different than it was before. It's not that big of a change.
Yeah. Human resources
Mm.
used to be something that helped a company grow.
Yeah.
And much like legal departments, it has become the de facto managers because they purport that risk is too high for us to tolerate.
Mm.
Um, and I see HR as something that should be complementary to management, that should fall
Mm.
under the purveyance. I see legal as something that should fall under the purveyance. We don't make decisions because someone told us there was risk. We should make decisions because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And most often, even in a world of grays, the right thing to do is pretty easy to spot, and it becomes easy to spot because it's easy to defend.
Mm-hmm.
DEI was never really easy to defend from a corporate perspective, in my mind, because there was no return on investment, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of what corporations are charged with, making a return to the shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have? I mean, you're a data guy. Do you have
Yeah.
empirical evidence that DEI or the we'll call it the new suppression of DEI is
Mm-hmm.
having a corporate effect on profitability?
Yes and no. So here's
Too
the thing.
soon?
It might be, but I see. Anytime a corporation does something that people don't like now, you will see the media say this or that group of people, or just people, are now boycotting this or that store. The
Yeah.
thing is, that is a hit to their profitability if there's a significant amount of people who are boycotting it, and if they boycott it for a significant amount of time, and if they were a customer to begin with. Okay, that's important because one of the ways that DEI and those kinds of initiatives and that kind of ideology initially bullied people was a bunch of people on Twitter would pile onto a company and say, well, I'm not buying from you anymore. And in some cases, the people who were saying that weren't customers in the first place, you know? And so it's like, well, who cares if you don't, these
A
people
threat
aren't
without
buying from you
merit.
anymore. Yeah, it's a threat without merit. But here's the thing: if you're a social media manager for a company and you see this online, you're like, oh my god, a bunch of people are not going to buy from us anymore,
Yeah.
and you don't do your research to see if they're actually your type of customer, then that
Okay.
looks like your company is going to take a massive hit to their profitability when actually they're not.
Yeah.
As for DEI being less profitable, it was never profitable in the first place. There's been in the last couple of years what has been called the business case for diversity. It's complete bunk, okay? And I'll explain why. Basically, what happened when the DEI crowd couldn't convince people of the moral imperative of their initiatives, of the, let's face it, sort of hard to justify weird out there initiatives like having people go in for a training where they denounce themselves as having white privilege, right? When they couldn't convince people of the merits, for lack of a better term, of that, they said, well, actually, DEI is good for your bottom line. And isn't that what we all care about? The problem is they use completely bogus research to justify it. Actually, I can give you an example of this if you want.
Yeah, I love empirical data, man.
Okay.
Especially specific. And the reason
Mhm.
I do, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, is that the mainstream media is getting us still different messages, and
Mhm.
I'm just curious about that. But I digress.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the studies that you'll see cited the most every time you see somebody go, actually, it's DEI is good for firm financial performance. Almost every single time I've seen this, it links to McKinsey and Company and one of their studies. Now, in case
Mhm.
you're not familiar with McKinsey and Company, yeah, I'm sure you are. Maybe the viewers aren't. They are an international, very powerful consulting company that, among other things, was partially responsible for the opioid crisis in America, which they had to pay a somewhat hefty fine for a couple of years ago. This company also did a number of DEI studies in which they supposedly proved that diversity is good for the bottom line of a company. There's a number of problems, though. Some of the problems is that from the very beginning, their studies use what's called reverse causality. So I'll give you an example using this exact research. If you're going to study if you're going to study if diversity leads to greater financial performance, you study the increase of diversity and then you study the actual increase in profitability. They
Or
did the
decrease.
reverse. They studied profitability and then studied diversity and then said, actually, diversity leads to greater profitability. Not true. What was actually true, what they actually found was that the more profitable a firm is, the more they invest in DEI initiatives. There might be many reasons for that, but they
Mm.
completely misrepresented it and switched it around. On
It's
top
almost
of
like
that,
confirmation bias, isn't it?
yes, yeah, and actually, yeah,
Here's the
go on, go
result
on.
I want, and here's the
Mm-hmm.
people I talk to who influence me on this. So I'm going to look at the result I want and the people who want it, and then I'm going to make sure that my assertions are consistent with
Yeah,
what my beliefs are.
yeah, and there's a finance professor by the name of, I believe it's Alex Edmonds, and he does a great takedown of their research methodology for anybody who loves data. And honestly, it's a great read. It's very accessible. He speaks in plain English. And one of the things he mentions, well, because sometimes research gets
Oh
complicated. There's
yeah.
always blah, 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 blah. There's 500 different citations after every single sentence. You're like, But one of the things he mentions is that not a single one of the people on some of these studies are scientists, not a single one of them. So
Mm.
it's no wonder the methodology is so bad. But then on top of the reverse causality, as if that wasn't enough, there's also no transparency because McKinsey didn't disclose the names of the companies they studied. They didn't disclose their data so other people could study it or confirm it. And
Hmm.
then when other researchers managed to sort of like reverse engineer the study and do one of their own, they found zero correlation between diversity and profitability once they looked at other factors like prior firm profitability. So, of course, a firm's going to be more profitable over time if they've established habits that have led them to be profitable in the past. They also didn't control for industry. Some industries are more profitable than others. Engineering, oil and gas, those tend to be more profitable than the restaurant industry. Go figure.
Yeah.
McKinsey didn't look at that. They didn't control for that.
Wow.
They also only looked at one form of profitability, which is EBITDA, not shareholder returns, which is a better measure of profitability over time. And again, if all these things weren't bad enough on their own, they also changed the metrics they used to measure firm financial performance based on what would make their results look good.
Crazy. Crazy.
Yep.
And
And this,
this
yeah,
is the one everybody's pointing to.
yes, yeah. And they
Yeah.
have, and here's the thing: it's not just one study, Jim. It's like 4 studies, and every study says based on the evidence of our last study, and you're like, you don't have any evidence from your last study. But these studies have been cited so much that they are cited in the DEI initiatives and the reasons for DEI departments in places like J.P. Morgan, Intel, Raytheon, and
Yeah.
the U.S. Navy. It's a
Yeah.
massively cited study.
Yeah. So, how has the mainstream media then
Hmm.
come in to support not only this study, but
Mm-hmm.
also because they often quote McKinsey, and it's like it's if I've heard of it, it's oft quoted. But how are they supporting the current climate of DEI or lack thereof?
So there's a couple of ways. One of the ways is that they don't look at the data, they don't look at the methodology of these sorts of things. So they'll just go, Actually, studies have shown that DEI is good for a company's bottom line, and then they'll even project something like, and we could see the stocks and the profitability of our American companies at a very volatile time in the economy. We could see those plummet, and you're like, no, we won't, because the foundation of your argument is wrong, right? The other way that they'll do this is they'll sometimes look at DEI as a argument between two people who are anti-DEI and pro-DEI, and they won't look at actually whether DEI works or not, and then they'll catastrophize about it. And this is not just the mainstream media, this is social media influencers, this is DEI people. They basically act as if DEI invented civil rights, equal
Wow.
rights, fair pay, all these things, and they act as if simply getting rid of DEI is going to throw us into this bigoted, discriminatory hellscape. That's we're basically going to go right back to the 1950s. Nobody's going to have any rights anymore. So they catastrophize about it, and it's just completely, it's insane. There's no foundation of reality.
On a corporate level, at a government level, I don't think it's ever gonna die, because it's ingrained in there a bit already. I think it can be limited, but the question then becomes: can it be reformed? Can it be reformed, or we just have to? I mean, I don't want to just rename it and have it be the same thing that says to my grandchildren, you don't get to do this because someone else is in your place and they're part of the quota.
Yeah. I would argue no, and this is where I diverge from some of the other people who are critical of DEI. I've heard some people say, for example, DEI has gone wrong, but the spirit of DEI is good, or DEI has some good aspects, and we should reform DEI, not get rid of it completely, because some of those aspects are good. Here's my question to those people, respectfully: what does DEI do that has not already been done better in the past by HR? Because if you're looking at some of the things DEI says they do, like, well, we ensure fair pay and fair hiring. That's an HR function. There's no reason for another department and more people getting paid for these things, even if it's completely benign. There's no reason to have that on top of HR if HR is supposed to be doing that. And DEI say, well, we train that sexual harassment is wrong or racism is wrong. You know who else does training?
The Bible.
HR. I mean, it's
Let's
ridiculous.
just get back to doing the right thing, man.
Yeah, it's ridiculous that they're trying to justify their existence when there's another department that's been doing that for decades. And if the argument is that that department hasn't been doing it good enough,
oh my goodness,
work with that department. But we don't need your extra initiatives on top of that. And that's in the most benign cases. But in a lot of cases, DEI, I believe, is thoroughly corrupted by this ideology that says everybody is part of an oppressor and oppressed group dynamic, and you have to force outcomes in order to right those wrongs, that you have to solve past discrimination with present discrimination and solve present discrimination with future discrimination. And that's not me talking. That's Ibram X. Kendi, who says those exact words verbatim in his many DEI trainings.
All right. So, what, if anything, should replace DEI?
So that's a good question. And honestly, I go back and forth sometimes, because I would love it if we could just get rid of DEI and that's it, right? Yeah. I would like doctors to go back to being doctors, lawyers to go back to being lawyers, and so on and so forth. People doing their jobs in an ethical way. However, as a psychologist, I also know that the best way to get rid of something is to replace it with something else that's better. Like if you're trying to get rid of a bad habit, replace it with a better habit. So, for example,
put on.
Yeah, put on. Exactly. Don't just, because then you got a vacuum and then it's easy to fall back in old habits. Yeah. So part of me just wants to get rid of it completely. The other part of me says, well, it might be better, more productive to replace it with something else. What I would like to replace it with, if we replace it with anything, would be merit, fairness, and innovation. All right. And let me explain what each of those things mean. When I say merit, I don't just mean competence. I mean the pursuit of excellence based on empirically proven research and job-related skills. Okay, knowledge, skills, abilities, basically what we used to do, but more proven by data and science. And I'm going to piss some
Got it.
people
But
off.
time out just a
Yeah,
second. There's
yeah,
going to
yeah.
people there's you're going to get some argument here because people are
Mhm.
going to say, well, the and I'm going to use education because
Yeah,
education is such an easy target. But
yeah.
but also there's people that are going to say, if the test scores don't match, it's because the tests aren't fair.
Mm.
So are there cultural biases to the testing dilemmas that are in the educational system?
Um, so it depends on the test, right? There are some things that are simply not. I mean, if you're measuring, I would prefer, for example, if you're measuring IQ, you can measure crystallized intelligence, which is like hard facts, like the quadratic equation. If I give you a problem, this is a quadratic equation. It's probably been a long time since you've done that. It's been a long time since I've done that. I couldn't do
Yeah.
that. I would look very stupid on a test with that.
Yeah.
However, if I was just in the school system, right in high school,
You,
looking for
you
colleges,
should
taking
you should
SATs,
have some type of
yeah,
a idea of the second law of thermodynamics. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And more importantly, if I'm trying to get into a college, I'm going to be using that information in college. Like if I've got to take a basic math course, I'm going to do really poorly if I'm
Hmm.
not able to do those kinds of equations. And those ACT and SAT questions are the things that are testing me to see if I'm good at those or not.
Hmm.
But we've got to be careful not to fall into the disparities equals discrimination fallacy, which is that any difference in outcome between different races and genders is automatically a product or an indication of discrimination. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. Wow. And so when people come forward and they say, "Hey, there's testing bias here,"
Mm,
there's some credibility there if you're talking about social studies.
mm,
There's some credibility there if you're talking about access to higher levels of math.
mm,
But I can tell you that I had an opportunity to homeschool my children,
mm,
and they crushed the tests, and they did so. And their mother was not a college graduate,
mm.
so I mean, even that was back in the day. This is in the, you know,
Yeah.
my son's 40 years old, so this is 20 years of history here, and the question then becomes with the changing face of education, that
Mm,
argument, especially with school choice popping up in places unlike California,
mm.
um,
Yeah.
that argument is beginning to leak like a sieve, isn't it?
Hmm. Oh yeah, and it's interesting, and this is not necessarily a great refutation of their argument, I have to admit, but I think it's interesting that when you look at you talk to almost anybody about the state of American education, and they'll say, "Oh man, it could be so much better." Then you point out some of the problems, and they go, "Whoa, whoa, hey, are you attacking education?" You're like, "No, no, I thought we were on the same side here. We both think there's something wrong with the education system. We both think, for example, that." This is kind of the Department of Education arguments when people are like, you can't get rid of the Department of Education. It's like, well, hold on a minute, hold on. We've established, me and the person who doesn't want to doesn't want to get rid of the Department of Education. We've already established that it has failed in many ways. That test scores should be higher than they are. That the Department of Education has known things about education that they haven't implemented, like later start times for teenagers, smaller classroom sizes, things like that. Why are we not open to reforming it in the ways that we both agree with? Why is it that as soon as I talk about wanting to reform education, suddenly I'm attacking the concept of education itself instead of just the quality of education?
Yeah. And back in the day, we wanted outcome based education. The only
Mm,
outcome I want is higher test scores because
yeah.
that's the proof in the pudding.
Hmm.
And whatever it takes to accomplish that, it's clear that dollars haven't done it.
Yeah. No kidding.
It
Yeah.
it it is clear that local control, and this is by any measure. If you look at
Mm,
parochial schools, if you look at home based education or a hybrid thereof, where you're talking about people who spend some time in the classroom and then spend some time studying other subjects
mm,
in a hybrid situation. Every indicator says that the private sector is doing a significantly better job of educating. Sometimes
oh,
for
yeah.
more money, sometimes
Hmm.
for no money, but it's happening, and it has nothing to do with any other marker except away from the public schools. So,
Hmm.
I, I guess I think you're right. So let's go from education. Let's drop over into my area of expertise, which is the corporate enterprise.
Mm.
Um, if you look at some of the firms out there, um, some of them aren't letting go. I- And as I look at that, I'm like, okay. So the ROI is actually impacting on a negative level.
Mm.
The pushback from clientele on a social, pretty widespread level is like, we looked at this and we don't think it worked.
Mm.
And we don't think it's fair. And our observation is that you should get away from that. Why are these firms like so resolved?
Mm. So it could be a number of things. And some of these firms, to be clear, like for our viewers, these are Apple, sort of Microsoft. Like they rolled back some things, but they kept other things. Starbucks has doubled down really hardcore. NBC, Universal, Comcast, that whole thing, they've doubled down on it. So there's a number of reasons. I mean, we could ask ourselves, what is it that makes people resistant to change their behavior, particularly around people who have a certain view of them. So Starbucks and a lot of these companies went all in on DEI,
Yeah.
and they started catering to customers who were of that persuasion, who agreed with that and liked that. And I think to some extent, there's a couple of the reasons I'll mention, but to some extent, they might be afraid of alienating those customers because they are their customers. You know, earlier I mentioned that some of the people had started these DEI initiatives thinking they were going to lose people if they didn't do them. But those people who said, we're going to boycott you, weren't actually their customers to begin with. Well, places like Starbucks, oh yeah, that's definitely their customers. Okay, that's not just their customers; that's their workers too. They've
Yeah.
they've cultivated this environment where they've attracted those people as employees and as customers. And so, if they go off the DEI train, especially cold turkey,
Yeah.
they probably will alienate people.
Yeah.
So maybe they're going to phase it out more slowly. Maybe they'll just, but they've put themselves in a really tough position. That's just one reason.
Yeah, my one of my grandsons
Mhm.
was recently fired from Starbucks. I'm so proud of him. He went there because he wanted to get some of their education benefits, but
Yeah.
he started to witness to his faith, his personal faith,
Mhm.
on to a person who had questions on
Mhm.
company time. And you're standing in a coffee shop at 1 in the afternoon. The drive-through ain't that busy, and you get a lot of time to talk to your coworkers. And
Yeah.
so he spoke freely and openly about his faith to a coworker, and they came back to him and they said, this is probably a good time for you to head down the road, and we don't want you working here. And they legit fired him. They will tell you it was for a different reason, but he accelerated through their leadership program
Mhm.
like in a matter of weeks because he's a farm kid and he does really well. But at the end of the day, that is the opposite of
Mhm.
DEI. So their
Yeah.
practices are, we want our diversity and we
Mhm.
want what we consider equity, and we're
Mhm.
only going to include people who check the right box.
Yeah. And to that point, it's not just checking the right box in terms of like skin color and gender. It's checking the right box ideologically. So it's not just about how you look; it's about how you think. So it's the scope of what they're looking for is even more narrow. It's not just non-white people and women and non-straight people and all that. It's also people who agree with the DEI ideology. And one of the religion or one of the things that the DEI is very much against is traditional values and religion and faith. They really don't like
Why?
those. So part of it is because I think DEI is a ideology of relativism. So everything is relative. And if you have a
Like
traditional faith,
morally relative, moral
morally relative,
relativism?
yeah,
Okay.
their moral relativism is tied to identity. So whether
Hmm.
something is right or wrong, true or false, is based on identity. This is why they say that if you are white, it doesn't matter if you're able to cite statistics about race, good statistics, good data. You're white, your opinion doesn't count. You can't know as much as a person who's non-white weighing in on
Hmm.
racial issues, even though empirically or logically that other person's arguments might not make sense. It's also why they have, quote unquote, other ways of knowing, even though, as I've heard one person say, we don't look for other ways of knowing when it comes to treating cancer. We don't look to, Native American spirituality. We use chemotherapy, we use this or we use that. Um,
Yeah.
Basically, they don't like things that say there is clear right and clear wrong. It gives them much less wiggle room to interpret things in the way that they want to interpret them.
So, how then are businesses responding to the
Mhm.
legal challenges and the difficulties that have been created by first DEI having it and then
Mhm.
shutting it off or not shutting it off when they could have? I mean, are businesses responding in a favorable way or maybe perhaps it depends on who?
It depends on who. So there are some companies that, again, there's various ways that they're avoiding actually tackling this. Some of them are not reporting it, but they are continuing it. Some of them are discontinuing explicit goals, but still practicing it. And some of them, this is one of the ones that's really sneaky. Some of them say, we've gotten rid of it. They're still hiring for qualities of DEI diffused through their job postings. So I remember when I was originally unemployed, I was looking for a job. One of the criteria that I would use to search for companies to hire for is if they didn't have DEI, which means basically there's no companies.
Mm,
Um, as soon as companies started divesting from DEI, I was like, oh my god, this is great. I can just look at the news, see what companies no longer have DEI initiatives, and apply for those. But what had happened is I would go on LinkedIn, I would look for the jobs I was qualified for, and hidden within some of those job descriptions were things like a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything you do. And Jim, here's the thing: these jobs, some of them were posted after the company supposedly discontinued the DEI initiatives. So they weren't
yeah.
just left over, already posted that they decided to leave up. These were new jobs with new postings that they had included DEI things in. So they're very sneaky the way they're doing some of this. Again,
Yeah.
I think some of it is they're just waiting until some of the pressure is off, and then they're going to continue it. And there have been some people who have explicitly said this. There was a webinar hosted by, I believe it's called Flux, for DEI people, and it was an entire webinar. I kid you not, it was an entire webinar dedicated to continuing DEI and doing all the terrible, toxic, discriminatory things they're doing under the radar.
Wow.
Actually, do you want an example of one of the sneaky ways they did this?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
one of the
sure.
ways that they recommended was if you're giving grants to people, one attendee during this webinar said, so I don't give grants to companies or organizations that have a majority white board of directors. That's not all white, that's majority white. So, if they had 5 out of 9 people who were white, this company was like, no, you're too white. We don't like that. They asked one of the hosts of the webinar, do I have to stop essentially discriminating against those groups? And the host said, no, but here's what you should do. You should partner with another grant giving organization that doesn't discriminate. That way, you look more, you can point people who are, who aren't allowed to go through you because of their race or their gender. You can point them to them and say essentially, no, it's okay. You got another water fountain over here, you know.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the sneaky ways that they're doing that. But they're very sneaky.
Are employees pushing back against some of these DEI initiatives now that it's a little more socially acceptable?
Um, I think so, but I'm not entirely sure because if you look at the way that DEI has spread through organizations
Hmm.
and the bit of a hyperbole here, the reign of terror they've unleashed in organizations where if you disagree, you're going to get censored or
Yeah.
fired. Um, I think a lot of people are still worried about speaking up, and it's still there's still DEI or DEI related people in these jobs because sometimes DEI departments go away, but the people are put into new roles, so they still have power, they still have influence, they're still working there, and they'll still report you. Um, so I think people are kind of pushing back and they're speaking out. They're more confident than they were 5 years ago. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But the threats to their jobs and their livelihood are still there, and people are, I think, kind of a little bit like 5 years ago. They're hoping that it'll go away without them having to explicitly make a stand and
Hmm.
possibly suffer the consequences.
For sure. Can you differentiate between a regional, local regional company, a
Mm.
national company, and specifically a multinational enterprise? Is there one who has clung a little bit more vociferously to DEI?
So local, not so much. Generally speaking, the smaller a company is, the less they invest in DEI because one, they don't have the money for it, and two, it's a bit superfluous. Like if you have, let's say, your small business with 10 employees, you're going to bring in somebody for a $10,000 seminar to educate 10 people. Like it doesn't make any sense, you know. But multinational companies definitely have dug in more. So Apple, Microsoft, Starbucks, some pharmaceutical companies have dug in too. Keep in mind, there are parts of Europe that have also drank the DEI Kool-Aid, so to speak, and
Oh
so
yeah,
they're very much. Some of these places are very much on board with it,
yeah.
and so they're keeping these multinational companies are keeping it because they know around maybe a third or a half of America is in favor of it, and a bunch of people in Europe are in favor of it. And that's the other
Yeah.
thing. Well, the other reason why DEI might not die or be dead in the way that we hear some people talking about it is because even if it goes away or goes underground in America for a little while, it's entirely possible that Europe could, so to speak, reinfect America afterward.
Hmm. Okay. So, what strategies should be employed to make sure that we're being fair? I mean, it's really
Yeah.
about fair. I
Mhm.
really about doing right thing, doing the best right thing.
Yeah.
What strategies do we employ to do that?
So again, I'm a data guy, and the IO psychology research is pretty clear about what works and what doesn't work. And what's interesting is what works actually does benefit women and minorities. Okay. So for example, do a job analysis. All right. Don't go into your job interview or if you're the hiring managers, don't go in there like, I think these are the things that we want to hire for. And I don't mean based on like, oh, here's what we've hired for in the past. Don't do that because the world is changing rapidly. Okay.
Yeah.
Like AI, ChatGPT has completely upended the way we think about work, the way we do work.
Yeah.
I mean, just a couple of years ago, we had people who were able to be digital nomads doing programming,
Yeah.
and they'd be able to travel wherever they wanted, work from wherever they want, so long as they had Wi-Fi. And now, tech companies are laying off or not hiring programmers because of, well, we can get ChatGPT to write code. I mean, that's how quickly
Hmm.
things are changing. It's insane. So do a recent job analysis on what you need
Yeah.
for that particular job based on your company culture, where you want to be today, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years from now. All right, do a job
Hmm.
analysis.
Yeah.
Um, then use behaviorally anchored rating scales to measure people in these jobs. Okay. What that means is you're not evaluating somebody based on your gut feelings. Okay. And the reason for this, a lot of people think that their gut feeling is good. I feel the same way too. I'm like, yeah, I kind of can get the vibe from people.
I
The
got
problem,
this.
yeah, I got this. I got this. I'm a hiring manager. I've been in this a long time. I can read people. I'm
Yeah.
basically corporate Sherlock Holmes. But the problem with that is, first off, if every single one of us could read other people the way we think we can or hope we can, none of us would have ever been lied to in any circumstance. And we know
Yeah.
that's not true. We know we've been fooled here or there. We've been a bit gullible then, or we are fallible human beings, okay? And you want to protect against that fallibility by evaluating people on behavior. It also helps guard you against people who are very, very charismatic, but they don't have a lot of substance behind them. They don't have a lot of character. So what
Yeah.
these scales do, or bars, behaviorally anchored rating scales, is allow you to evaluate people's behavior rather than just their words.
Mm.
You do that, and those things, especially if you ask everybody the same questions, that's called a structured interview. Structured interview, job analysis, bars, those things help reduce the possibility of discrimination. So it's not only meritocratic, it also helps minorities and women.
So, how does that then impact? If you look at that, like if you do a performance evaluation,
Mhm.
how's that been impacted by um, remote and hybrid work?
So this is one of those things where I think we really ought to look more at productivity rather than busyness. So for example, let's take something simple like keystrokes.
Yeah.
If I'm evaluated based on how much work I'm doing, let's say I'm a copywriter, so it's directly connected to words, and I'm evaluated based on my keystrokes. Well, what if I'm just constantly messing up? But I'm writing at a rapid rate, but half of those keystrokes are me having to delete and rewrite things. For somebody who writes slower, types less, but gets more done, for the actual
And it
job.
isn't a video game.
No, no, yeah, exactly. We've got to look at actual people getting things done rather than just
Sure.
being busy. And I think that's
Yeah.
where we've seen some people not. I would have liked to see remote work be less, micromanaging and
Hmm.
more goal based and achievement based. So if instead of being like, well, I'm going to measure your keystrokes until you get this project done, measure me on whether I get the project done at all and what quality the project is. Because if I'm really good at my job and it takes me, let's say 2 hours to get something done that somebody else with faster keystrokes takes 5 hours to get done, I'm the better worker. I'm the one who you want to promote. I'm the one you want
Yeah.
to pay more. And I'm the one who should ultimately be rewarded, even if after doing that, I'm in my pajamas and I take my dog for a walk. I'm the one who ultimately helped your company be more productive and more profitable.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be a lot of companies are going to have to play catch up, because we're going to see this with ChatGPT too. Is if
Oh,
it took
sure.
me 3 days to write a proposal, and now it takes me 3 hours because all I had to do was ask ChatGPT to write a rough draft, which I then revised, and that was the 3 hours of work. Then
Or
ultimately, I've
4 minutes.
or 4 minutes, or 4 minutes. Just
Yeah.
boom, knock it out.
Yeah.
Then I'm using technology to help our company become more productive and more profitable, but that doesn't quite fit with the old ways of doing things.
Mm.
So let me be clear. When I critique DEI and I'm talking about replacing with something better, I don't just mean get rid of DEI. I mean, we've got a lot of problems, a lot of challenges in the world right now. Let's focus on those things. Let's focus on what's more pressing, like how to incorporate AI humanely and ethically into the workplace and measure productivity rather than just busyness.
Yeah, lots of opportunity
Oh, yeah.
for improvement, and
Hmm.
also one of the things that really comes into play, and it's a big part of my heart as well.
Mm,
Um, DEI could have been used.
mm.
I'm trying to word this very carefully.
Yes, yeah.
DEI or some version of it could have been used to support and encourage folks with disabilities of one sort or another.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that that didn't happen. Um,
Yeah.
and how can we foster a more welcoming environment, especially with remote and hybrid work for people
Mhm.
with disabilities?
Yeah. So let me first start this by saying that I myself have a disability. It's not one of the super visible ones. It's not like I'm not in a wheelchair, thank God. I'm not missing limbs, thank God. But I have, for the last over a decade now, I've had it was a spine injury that became a disability. It's very hard for me to sit for a long time.
Hmm.
And when I do sit, I'm talking like 2 hours at most at a time, I have to wear a back brace. Okay. It can be uncomfortable. It's very limiting. And I have been disappointed by the fact that DEI really hasn't given that much attention to people with disabilities. And when they have, they've done it in that oppressor oppressed binary dynamic where it supposedly puts me at odds with people who are able bodied. And then they'll come up with stupid things. They're like, well, you're not disabled, Ryan. You're differently able. And I'm like, okay, shut up. I mean, not to be rude, but like, who is this for? I'm the one with the disability. I think that's
Yeah.
silly. Like, I can do everything that you can do, except for a few things. You renaming it is not going to change the challenges that I face. Now,
Hmm.
what should be changed, what we should talk about, is accommodations. And what's interesting here is that DEI, as much as it would like to think it, did not invent disability accommodations, and they did not invent the American Disabilities Act. Because again, this is some of the catastrophization that I see among
Yeah.
DEI supporters and DEI people. They act as if we get rid of DEI, we've gotten rid of anything that helps disabled people.
Yeah.
Jim, I kid you not, I've seen people say, well, without DEI, we're not going to have disability ramps anymore. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's
It's
crazy.
also against the law.
It's against the law, and again, it's like you didn't invent
Uh,
tolerance and compassion and all these, abolition, desegregation, the
yeah.
suffrage movement. All these things happened before DEI. You want to come on the scene, act like you did it all? It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. But back
Yeah.
back to the point. What should we do about accommodating people with disabilities? I think again, changing the scope of business to focus on productivity versus busyness, that helps. Because I'll use my own disability as an example. I have trouble sitting. Okay. If you require me to be in the office sitting for 8 hours a day, and I'm working on projects that won't be due a month till now. That's very hard for me to do. I can't sit that long, and if I
Yeah.
do, I'm going to have shooting pain down my legs. I'm going to be unable to sit or do anything. I'm going to be debilitated for the next couple of days.
Yeah.
But if you tie what I'm doing not to the time spent in a chair, but to actually completing the project, then I'm going to use my creativity to figure out how to do that work without hurting myself. And I might
Yeah,
do
for
2 hours
sure.
here, stand up, take a break, go for a walk, sit down for another hour and a half, do that,
Stand up
stand up,
desk,
stand up desk, things like that.
rubber mat. I mean,
Rubber
there's,
mat,
yeah.
things of that nature. Again, but you have to be able to say it's more important that you get something done than it is that you have your butt in the chair for 8 hours between the times that we tell you. And this is another thing. Flexible work schedules are great. Okay, they're great. If
Mhm.
you actually care about, inclusion and equity and all that, they're great, particularly for women who want to become mothers. If you are raising a child and you've just come back from maternity leave, but you still want to spend time with that child, if you've got a project that's not due for another month and it doesn't need to be worked on officially during work hours, you can take care of your child and be with them in the moment. And then when they nap, you work on your project for work. When they're going to sleep, you work on your project, So flexible work schedules are great for productivity, people with disabilities. There are ways that we can do things that are good for people with disabilities without ever getting into the DEI territory.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's starting to make so much sense. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that really comes up often, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
huge segment of our audience that is millennials, that is Gen X, that is Gen Y is in the workforce. It and all the way down. I've even got some grandkids who are alphas who are right on the cusp of coming into
Oh,
the
wow.
workforce. And
Congratulations.
as I look at that, they have their own version of a fairness doctrine. And
Okay.
a lot of times it surrounds whether something feels fair or not.
Mm.
Are the generations behind me, are they starting to embrace a fairness doctrine that does not include um, DEI practices the way that they were set up?
So can you tell me a little bit more about the fairness doctrine? Like what is it that they interpret as
If
fair or
it
not
looks
fair?
fair and it
Mm-hmm.
feels fair, it's now fair.
Yeah. So I see where you're going. I agree and I disagree because part of the thing is like one of the interesting things in the last couple of years, if you look at the divergence of, let's just say, people on the political spectrum, more women have gone more to the left, while more men have gone more to the right in recent years. Now, I
Hmm.
think that is partially because of DEI initiatives discriminating against people like men, telling them that if they do anything masculine, it's toxic masculinity, and so on and so forth. But what I'm getting at here is that there are people who never bought into the DEI lie to begin with, and now they might just be feeling more confident about stepping forward and speaking up, or they're just sick of it. Like, what, enough of this. I thought it was
Yeah.
just a fad. I thought it was going to go away, so now they're more comfortable with it. Another thing might be that people are realizing after the many examples of DEI not working or being bad, they're realizing this stuff doesn't actually work. I mean, even women and minorities were like, it seems like this is more made to serve the very few women and minorities who are able to get these DEI positions and their friends and people they like
Mm,
and people who agree with them ideologically. It's more suited to serve them than it is to
yeah.
serve women in general and minorities in general, like they've said it's supposed to. So the fairness doctrine, I think some people are definitely waking up to it or feeling more comfortable speaking out. But then again, I think there's also a lot of people who their feeling of fairness is more relativistic, more it's in the opposite direction. It's very pro
Yeah.
DEI.
Yeah. Well, I have a millennial
Mm-hmm.
who recently spoke with, and he's a business owner.
Mm-hmm.
And he originally was kind of all in on
Mm-hmm.
DEI, even though he owned a regional sized company. And I consulted with him, and he came back to me later, and and I said, "So how's the DEI
Mm-hmm.
initiatives working out?" He said, "Oh, we're done with that." I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why?
Okay, good question.
Because number one, it wasn't fair, and number two, what they were selling, and I'm quoting, was hogwash.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I said, "What's hogwash?" He says, "That's the water you throw out after you wash the hog."
Oh
So,
man.
is there a generational? Is there a broader generational acceptance or rejection of DEI happening? I guess that's the essence of the
Mhm.
question from the
Yeah.
Grampian.
Yeah. I would say that older people in general have not bought into DEI in the same way that the younger generation has. My theory for that is that older generations have lived through and seen the kinds of discrimination that the younger generations who did buy into DEI, the
Yeah,
older generations have seen the kinds of discrimination that the DEI people think exists in the modern world. So,
yeah,
the younger people are saying, well, if you have a unqualified minority, and I'm not saying that minorities are unqualified, because I know a critic is going, are you saying that? No, I'm not saying that. If you have an unqualified minority and a qualified majority person, and the majority person wins, a younger person will say that's discrimination. But if they're bought into the DEI thing, but
yeah,
if you're in an older generation, you're like, no, I lived through actual discrimination. I know what that looks like. So for example, some of the older black people in this country, like, I lived through the 60s. I know how much progress we've made. Maybe we're not to where I want us to be. We've made so much progress. And doesn't that makes them more resistant to one of the DEI myths that says
yeah.
essentially we've made no progress at all. We're one step away from the 1960s or the 1950s.
All
So
right.
they've lived counter examples to DEI ideology. So younger people bought in more to it. And the divide we're seeing now is sort of split along the two genders.
America, take a note. We're still getting
Mm-hmm.
better. We're
Yep.
not everything we want to be, but we're headed in the right direction. So,
Yeah.
how do people get in touch with you, Ryan?
I'm on LinkedIn, Ryan Ruffaner on LinkedIn. I prefer that just because I don't want to get my email inbox flooded with messages or anything like
Yeah.
that. So Ryan Ruffaner, LinkedIn.
Ruffaner,
Mm-hmm.
Ruffaner.
Yes,
And so
sir.
you, in a very short time, have lived a pretty darn big life. And we are proud of you. We're proud to know you.
Thank you.
But there's some other people who were champions who helped you get where you are today.
Mhm.
Who is one of those people who affected you in such a significant way that you just gotta like say thank you to him right now?
That would definitely be my mother. I know it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. So I'm just gonna spill here. My father was not in the picture from a very young age.
Uh huh.
She was a single mother. My father, uh, he through various things, he destroyed her credit score. Led to us almost getting the house foreclosed on. So we were almost homeless at one point. When he was out of the picture, my mom essentially had to get a job at Walmart making minimum wage. I'm talking $7.25 an hour.
Wow.
Um, and she was able to raise three boys, and not just work to put food on the table and clothes on her back, but she was also able to somehow find the time and the energy to be present with us, to play with us, to raise us, to mentor us, to help us with homework. I remember I asked her, I asked her at one point, how did you manage to do it? Like, how did you manage to do it? And she said, I just knew that failure wasn't an option.
Yeah.
And that's always stuck with me, because there was not a single moment that I can think of where she wasn't providing for us and raising us and really being a mother, a mentor, and all the things that I could have asked for in a person. And today, the mortgage is stable. She's got a great credit score. She worked her way up to becoming a speech pathologist. Every single one of us has graduated college, two of us with master's degrees, living, working independently. She's just done an incredible job. And, for at least half those years that I'm talking about, she's had debilitating chronic pain, and she's pushed her way through it. She is
Wow.
an inspiration. So
Way to
I'm,
go,
I'm getting, I'm,
Mom.
getting- yeah, I'm
We
getting
thank
choked
you,
up.
Mom.
Yeah.
And all of you moms out there, but Ryan's mom in specific. All right. So Ryan, thanks again for coming on the Grampian. I'm sure we're going to talk again. And if people want to speak with you, if people want to you to speak to their group, it's Ryan Ruffaner, Ruffaner, on LinkedIn. Ladies and gentlemen, until next time, you keep dreaming those Grampian-sized dreams. And this is Jim, and I am out. When you get an opportunity, subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast.